It was the coldest and most unforgiving New Year's Eve of the winter, with heavy, relentless snowflakes falling from a leaden sky to cover every hidden corner of the city in a thick, icy white blanket. A small, destitute match girl, with her golden head bare and her tiny feet already turning a painful purple, struggled through the deserted, wind-swept streets in a desperate, final hope of selling a few matches. She had lost her old, tattered wool cap and her mother's oversized, clumsy shoes, which had slipped off her feet as she scrambled frantically across the frozen, carriage-strewn road to avoid being crushed by the wealthy. The girl's delicate, translucent skin was pale and drawn from hours of bone-chilling exposure, and her small, cracked feet were so swollen and numb that they no longer felt the biting, cruel frost of the pavement. She shivered uncontrollably and dared not return to her cold, drafty attic room because she had not sold a single match all day and knew her father's harsh, violent temper would await her in the shadows. The only warmth she could sense in the world were the golden rays of light escaping from the large, frosted windows and the delicious, mouth-watering smell of roast goose wafting from the kitchens of the tightly closed houses. Finding a small, narrow recess between two towering, indifferent stone buildings, she huddled down as tightly as her small frame allowed, using her own thin body to block the cutting, bone-chilling winds of the winter night. In her profound, crushing isolation and utter lack of hope, the simple thought occurred to her to sacrifice just one tiny match to create a fleeting, momentary source of warmth for her freezing, blue fingers. She took a single match with trembling, clumsy fingers, struck it with a sharp rasp against the rough stone wall, and a small but brilliant flame immediately flared up, bringing a magical, temporary glow to the darkness. In that flickering, precious moment of light, she imagined herself sitting comfortably in a cozy, carpeted room before a great, cast-iron stove with a roaring fire that chased away every bit of the winter's ice. The flame danced beautifully before her white eyes, radiating a comforting, life-giving warmth against her frozen face. But in a mere cruel second, the match burned out and the warm illusion vanished into the hollow darkness. Feeling the biting cold return with even greater, more painful intensity, she decided to light a second match, desperate to witness that soothing, golden miracle one more time before the night claimed her completely. This time, the soft light fell upon the cold, gray stone wall, turning it transparent and thin like a fine silk veil, allowing her to look directly into the grand, opulent room that lay just beyond her reach. She saw a massive table laden with a lavish, steaming feast, covered in a snow-white linen cloth and featuring a golden, perfectly roast goose that filled the cold air with its rich, savory aroma. Then a wonderful miracle happened. The roast goose suddenly hopped off its silver platter, with a carving knife and fork still stuck in its back, and waddled with a comical gait directly toward the starving girl. But just as she reached out her thin, trembling hands to touch the feast of her wildest dreams, the second match flickered and died, leaving her once again alone with the cold, hard stone wall and the falling snow. She quickly and frantically struck a third match, and this time, she found herself sitting beneath the magnificent, spreading branches of a massive, shimmering Christmas tree that was taller and brighter than any house in the city. Thousands of tiny, glowing candles, shining like stars fallen from the night sky, hung from the lush green boughs, sparkling more brilliantly than any festive lights she had ever witnessed in her short, difficult life. The girl reached out her small, ice-cold hands to touch the dazzling, flickering lights, but the match went out, and the candles soared higher and higher into the sky until they became the twinkling stars of the universe. The girl sat shivering and utterly exhausted against the frozen wall, but she resolved to light the rest of her matches in a grand defiance of the dark, refusing to let herself fall back into the harsh reality. When the fourth match flared with a strong and brilliant light, warmer and more radiant than the sun, a glorious halo appeared, and in the center of the glow, she saw the loving, smiling face of her grandmother. The only person in the world who had ever truly loved and cared for her with kindness, appeared with a gentle, serene expression that promised an end to all her earthly sorrows and pain. "Grandmother." The little girl cried out in a voice filled with longing, "Oh, please take me away with you. Don't let yourself disappear like the warm stove and the feast when this tiny match burns away into ash." She was terrified that this divine, heavenly light was only a temporary dream, and that when it faded, her grandmother would also vanish back into the bitter, dark night of the uncaring and silent city. In a frantic, desperate effort to keep the beautiful vision alive, she took the entire bundle of remaining matches and struck them all at once against the cold, unfeeling stone wall. In a burst of fire, the light from the 40 matches flared up with a magnificent intensity, as bright as broad noonday, and her grandmother appeared more distinct, radiant, and majestic than she had ever been in the world of the living. The old woman opened her loving, ethereal arms and gathered the small, shivering girl into them, embracing her with a profound warmth and a deep affection that the girl had craved for so many lonely years. Together, they began to fly upward in a beam of dazzling golden light, escaping the freezing world of mortals and soaring far above the reach of hunger, cold, and the cruelty of the human heart. They flew high, higher and higher through the winter clouds and the biting winds, to a place where there was no more winter, no more poverty, and no more tears, but only eternal and perfect joy. The following morning, the sun rose over the quiet city, shining its bright, indifferent light into the cold corner where the little match girl still sat perfectly still and quiet against the white stone. She sat there with unnaturally rosy cheeks and a radiant, peaceful smile frozen upon her lips, looking to all the world as though she were lost in a deep, quiet, and very beautiful sleep. But the truth was that the little girl had frozen to death in the extreme cold of New Year's Eve, her small, frail body stiffened by the frost amidst a circle of charred and blackened matches. Passers-by found her clutching the burned remains of her final hope, but none of them could possibly understand or even imagine the beautiful and miraculous sights she had witnessed in her final hour. No one knew she had already flown away with her beloved grandmother to welcome the new year in a place of eternal bliss and unending, heavenly happiness far beyond the reach of the world. The harsh, clinical cold of the morning light made her warm, golden dreams seem like a distant memory, yet her face retained a fixed look of perfect, undisturbed, and holy serenity for all to see. The world saw only a tragic, pathetic scene of extreme poverty and lost life, never realizing the sacred meeting and the infinite, overwhelming joy that had graced her final moments on the icy street. She had finally found the ultimate and most beautiful liberation, escaping her harsh, hollow, and painful life through a gentle death that was filled with the most radiant of heavenly visions and love. Her final, glowing dream stands as a painful, eternal indictment of the cruelty of a society that allows children to suffer, and the indifference of the wealthy during a night of celebration. Yet it was the humble light of those tiny, cheap matches that brought her the only true warmth she ever knew, both of the body and the spirit, in the final hour of her journey. And in the end, she was welcomed by the purest and most unconditional of loves, flying higher than any of the festive lights that had lit the cold, dark city on that fateful night.